Wednesday discussions of truth, Winwood Radio. Soon transitioning into Winwood Podcast. More details in the near future in regarding that. I want you to please know that at Trottier.com, I continuously throughout the week update the articles tab with various articles, books, all PDF format, all free to access, with literature, regulations, whatever it may be, that I found pertinent for you, the listener, to understand exactly where discussions of truth comes from and where our guests may be coming from. For instance, and we've got to act quickly because we have our first guest standing by, two guests joining us today. I'll get to that in a minute. Anthony Sutton, former Stanford Hoover Fellow that digs deep, 1972 Miami Beach Convention. He revealed various information regarding what some may understand to be elements of the deep state, mainly the Bush family, Prescott Bush, funding the Nazi regime, funding both sides of World War II in that regard. So Anthony Sutton was reprimanded at Stanford and told to never divulge that information again. He walked away within a year or two, began publishing his own work privately and also with Trine Day. Speaking of Trine Day, April 2020, Trine Day will be publishing Freedom Reserved, No More Lies. And that is brought to you by yours truly, Ian Trottier. So look for my book coming out in April. Guest slate, 800-page, completely obliterating the pharmaceutical industry book by Gerald Posner. He's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. Let's see. Perhaps this has the legs to make number 4. We don't know. We'll see. But I do know one thing, that it is meticulously researched and it completely destroys the very corrupt pharmaceutical industry. That is Gerald Posner, former Wall Street attorney. Andy Thomas and that's April 15th. Andy Thomas will be joining us as well in May, and he has written a updated and revised edition, Conspiracies, the Facts, the Theories, the Evidence. He goes into various conspiracies that certainly swirl around the Donald Trump regime, but get into the Pentagon and then things that are pertinent to his home country, the UK, such as why Diana was knocked off, which is definitely pertinent because you see Harry now marrying an American, and now he's taking a backstage. And technically, he is a member of the royal family, but he's kind of not, isn't he? So one thing before we bring on Laurent Simons, who's a prodigal electrical engineering fellow, very young fellow. Bring him on for a few moments, and then we'll be bringing on Dr. Jane Ruby. Let me quickly mention a slate coming up for you. Next week, we'll be having Kenan Annette and Russ Baker. Following that will be Bandy Lee, and then Tom Hartman. That will bring us right up into the end of February before we start March off with former CIA and CIA agent Kevin Shipp. One thing to look at as you look at the circus going on in the American political scene right now, you have to distinguish between Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country. Washington, D.C. similar to the city of London. And I'm not talking about London as a city. I'm talking about the city of London, which is controlled by a banking industry that the Queen cannot even enter without permission. You have to distinguish the two. And so what that relates to is your American Federal Reserve. And that has something to do with the puppeteering that's happening in the United States. Okay, so we will thread in our first guest onto the program. Again, this is Ian Hamilton Trottier. You're on Windward Radio, Discuss Your Truth. Look for us on podcast format. Look for us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor.fm, IanTrottier.com has all of our past episodes, and you can patron the site. And that is your intro for today. First guest coming up. Let's ring him in via Skype.
Hello.
Hello,
Ian?
Laurent. Yes, Alexander.
Hi. Good evening. Laurent is also here.
Hello.
Hello, Laurent. Welcome to Discuss Your Truth, Miami-based Windward Radio. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Well, it's late evening for you. Are you in Belgium?
Yes.
Yes, it's 11 o'clock now.
Well, thanks again for joining and staying up so late. Now, Laurent, from the American standpoint, we understand that you are a very smart nine-year-old, and you understand electrical engineering very well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Say that again.
Yes.
That's.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you smarter than your father?
Yes. Sure. Yes.
Definitely.
Dad says yes, definitely. And the two of you speak very good English. Why is that?
Yes, because all my courses at the university were also in English. So.
And when he was a child, he was also at a lot of international schools, and we've also been a lot in the U.S., also in Miami, by the way. So we speak English fluently. Yeah.
Fantastic. What did you like most about Miami?
Everything, especially the Brickell area.
Yeah.
We also had a very nice hotel, South Beach, everything, and definitely the climate.
Yes, good. And did you get a chance? Did you get a chance to look at the artwork in Wynwood?
Oh no! Unfortunately, we didn't.
Okay, maybe next time. So, Laurent, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you see yourself as being just understood? Do you think you're a smart kid? Or tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. I'm just a smart child, and
and definitely not modest.
And I almost finished my bachelor in electrical engineering.
Yeah.
And yes, and now I'm planning to do my PhD.
And where's that? Where do you want to do that?
Unfortunately, we cannot tell. My apologies, Ian.
Okay. That's understandable. That's totally fine. So you finished your bachelor's, and then have you completed a master's as well?
No.
Bachelor, I didn't complete at all.
Fully. I think like 95% he completed of the subjects. But because it's such an extraordinary case, he will start his PhD soon, I think in the coming weeks. So he always wants to start in March. So that's in a few weeks. Yeah.
So for listeners to understand, the bachelor's has not been completed, but you've been granted opportunity to start the PhD without completing the bachelor's. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And explain that process, how you've gotten that authorization.
Because Laurent has extraordinary abilities. That was possible. Normally, like for instance, for me, I had to do my bachelor, then a master, and then you graduate. And if you want it afterwards, you can do a PhD. But for Laurent, it's all kind of different because it's such an exceptional case. And I remember once, even when he was at high school, and he didn't even finish his high school, he was also offered to do his PhD in medicine. So,
My goodness! Wow. Okay.
yeah, but he's really exceptional. Yeah.
So this.
That's
So Laurent, how do your peers treat you? You're obviously brilliant, and how do your friends receive you? Do they ask you questions nonstop?
With my friends, I never talk about my study. I only play and
Okay.
just free time with them.
And when did you realize or think that you had a special intellectual gift? At what age did you feel that you were advanced?
Really, myself, I have no idea.
because since he was little,
Yeah.
he was separated from the rest of the class. Because when we went to school, we got feedback from the teachers, and they told us in the classroom he couldn't get along with other children, even though the other children were his friends.
Yeah.
But for him, everything went too slow, and for the others, everything went too fast. So what they did, they took him out of the classroom and put him in a separate classroom, and where he could study on himself. And then once in a while, the teacher came by to see if he fully understood everything, and if he had questions, and if not, he could proceed as his own piece. Yeah.
Incredible. And so, at what age was that?
I think around 5.
Okay. And
yeah, around 5. Yeah, when he was 5.
Alexander, do you have any other children?
No,
Just
he's the only one. Yes.
So Laurent, you're 9 years old, and so that's you're incredibly advanced intellectually, but you also haven't lived much. But so I'm going to throw a question out here for you that might not be that easy to answer, but I'm gonna ask it to you. I'm gonna ask it for you. Given what you understand globally, how do you want to leave the world a better place? How would you like to change the world?
With making artificial organs, so that extend human life.
Extend human life.
Yes, and maybe immortality.
Incredible. And so, what is immortality? That is incredible. So, Laurent, what are the contributions and what are the advances that you have made at the moment and scholastically that have helped you take a step towards that? My understanding is that it's electrical engineering that is your specialty. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what have you done to make an advance towards that?
I already made a sort of brain on chip, so a sort of what do you call it? To look how medicines react on brains and that sort of things. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but.
That's okay. I think the listeners have a basic idea of what you're getting at. What is your time frame, Laurent? When do you think you can accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish here?
I think maybe about 10 or 20 years.
10 or 20 years. So in 10 or 20 years, you will have made a contribution to prolong life, or you will have been able to achieve immortality. Which one?
I think already immortality.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. Alexander, do you have any idea what your son's talking about?
Not really.
Yeah.
When we drive him to the university and so on, we get mini lectures because he's so excited and he wants to share.
Yeah.
I'm a dentist, so I'm not into the technical things, but I learned a lot, and it's really exciting. And what's very important at Laurent, when he says something, he really also does it.
Wonderful.
That's something even from when he was a child. I remember they came for interviews, and then he was only 6, and they told us, when will you finish high school? How long does it take? He told us, to the journalist 1.5 years, after 1.5 years, he completed secondary school, and then they asked him about the university. He also told more or less 1 year. So it's all he knows what he's talking about. Yeah.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. We scheduled this to be a short 10-minute segment, and so we've got to wrap this up. I appreciate your time, listeners. This is Alexander and Laurent Simons. Laurent is a 9-year-old prodigy. I want to leave both of you with some closing comments and some closing thoughts for listeners. So we'll start with you, Alexander, and then we'll end with Laurent. Alexander, the question is, the closing thought here, what is it that you want listeners to understand about your son? And then Laurent, I want you to also follow that up and give listeners some final thoughts on how you feel that as an individual, as a human being, they can improve their lives. Go ahead. Start with you, Alexander, please.
It's important for people to know that Laurent doesn't want to become an electrical engineer or study something and then proceed in that. Laurent wants to study, I think, 6 courses: electrical engineering, bioengineering, medicine, and a lot of things, and then combine them into one person, himself, and then make a contribution to society, especially to grandparents, because his opinion is a grandchild should never miss their grandparents, and that's what he wants to reach. Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for that. Laurent, I want you to please give some closing comments here for listeners out there, please.
Okay. Just my sort of I just want to make the world a better place, and I just want to extend life so that nobody have to miss their grandparents and other loved ones.
And Laurent, do you have a website that people can contribute to or follow you, study you?
Yes, my Instagram account.
Absolutely, excellent. And would you please give that address or that handle?
That is Laurent_Simons.
Wonderful. Alexander, Laurent, thank you for joining Discuss Your Truth, Windward Radio. We look forward to inviting you back on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is Alexander and Laurent Simons, 9-year-old genius. He's just about finished his bachelor's degree. Again, this is a 9-year-old young man in Belgium, electrical engineering with sites. It sounds like he's beginning his PhD here in the spring, and just making incredible contributions to the academia at an incredibly young age. So what a wonderful opportunity to host Laurent Simons on Discussions of Truth. Again, as I was mentioning before, when you go to Ian Trottier, INTROTTIER, go to articles. The articles tab has what I feel, and this is where we're going to bring on Judy here in a minute. She's standing by. But what I feel are incredibly pertinent, especially with what's going on with the impeachment hearing in the United States. If you follow that at all, wherever you're listening, you have to go back to the William Charter. Look at some of these old documents. And I'm not talking about last year, 10 years ago. I'm talking about hundreds of years old. You have to dig that deep, because some of the banking industry is centuries old control. If you count the Jordan Maxwell episode that we opened up the year with, January 2nd, he went into that. You have to go into that and have to look at some of these old treaties that still stand. For instance, let me give you a better picture. The United Kingdom and the United States are one and the same. They both report to what is a central bank. Even though the Bank of England, which is in the city of London, as I was mentioning earlier, the banking neighborhood, is its own central. It is a undisputed central bank, and the royal family is a separate power, not as powerful, and you can do your own research, not as powerful as the city of London is, as the banking that controls basically the royal family and the country of England. It's separate. It's a central bank. It's not by all means. It's not a public bank by any means. That is similar to the Federal Reserve. Okay, the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's not federal. It's a private banking. It's what would be interpreted by many definitions as a central bank. And so the question for Americans is, who controls the Federal Reserve? All right, because it's not voted on. The members are not voted on. It's not audited. All right, so that gives you a good understanding, or a good place to understand what Trump talks about when he talks about deep state. You have to kind of follow that angle. All right, next guest, Dr. Jane Rudy is a DC pundit, and she has been standing by. She's an author. She's a speaker. She's firearms trained. She loves the United States. She's an incredible patriot. And she's standing by. We're going to ring her in right now. Again, this is Winwood Radio, Discuss Your Truth. We are transforming to a podcast format at Winwood Radio. You can find all of my past episodes at iantrottier.com. And this is, again, the fourth season. This is the fourth year that we've been doing this. I've been doing this program. We've had incredible guests joining us, and we continue to grow and receive wonderful guests. The state of media, which is something that we are going to be addressing here with Jane, is by all means in disarray, if you will. There is a major crisis, in my opinion, regarding media in the United States, not only in the United States, globally. Okay, bringing in Dr. Jane Ruby.
Hello.
Hello, Jane. Welcome to Discuss Your Truth. This is Ian Trottier. You're on Winwood Radio. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Ian, but you're cutting in and out a little bit, so I'm worried about our connection.
Okay, well, we'll give it our best shot. Can you hear me all right now?
Yep, that sounds better. I think sometimes it takes a second or two to really connect tightly.
Fantastic. Dr. Jane, so tell listeners a little bit about yourself. You are a DC-based pundit, and you're a strong patriot. Are you a PhD, an MD? Is it just your title? Tell listeners a little bit about yourself.
No, it's not just a title, and people shouldn't be using the title doctor if they're not credentialed properly. I do have actually 2 doctorates, both earned, not honorary. One is a PhD in psychology. I was a former sleep investigator and a neuroscientist, and my second doctorate is in education. I'm actually a published health economist, so it's all traceable. It's all in the government's website, PubMed. And I am a political pundit, and I'm a conservative.
Fantastic. And Jane, that's quite the accomplishment there. 2 doctorates to your name. Tell us, in your opinion, what's going on, and I want to talk about your book, the book that you've written, but tell us, in your opinion, what's going on in politics in the United States?
Well, overall, in general, we've had a huge shift, and what we've come to actually is really, people are talking about it as the meeting of good and evil. And so what I think has happened is conservatism pretty much lost its way a little bit and kind of got diluted, and I'm not sure what happened after the Tea Party came and went a little bit. But on the left, we found the Democrats moving from, the John Kennedy type of Democrat, where his famous motto was, don't ask your country what it can do for you. Let's see what you can do for your country. Well, and so the Democrats have gone all the way to as far left as they can go. I also think that a majority of the party's been hijacked. And that's why you see Nancy Pelosi caving to this small faction of, progressive communists in the party that have yanked the party even further to the left and pushed for, radical changes and crazy things like impeachment, because the president sneezed practically.
Yeah, right. I mean, no, you bring up a good parallel with John Kennedy, because it seems like, and what I've seen in my lifetime is, certainly the political lines have gotten divided, and I mean, you look at like Mitt Romney today, and he stands out. He stood up for his conviction, and he voted against he voted for the impeachment, or voted against his party line. But you see on so many different levels, you see kind of a meshing on various national topics. Whereas I think in JFK's day, I think he kind of viewed politics as more of serve your country, get beyond, even though he identified as a Democrat, get beyond your party line and just serve your country, make your country a great place. What can you do for your country? So now you also bring up a good point where you think the party has been hijacked. Who's hijacked it, and how's and what's going on there? in your view?
What's hijacked the left is the progressive, there's a movement toward communism. I don't think that younger people in America, and I'm not being condescending, but I really don't think they have an appreciation for what socialism and communism really are. Because if they really saw it, there's really nothing romantic about it. There's nothing really equal about it or healthy. And I just wanted to go back to one quick point, if you don't mind. You mentioned Mitt Romney. I don't want to give him a pass for kind of meshing on the right. He's not meshing at all. Mitt Romney's a sellout. He's a fraud. And he totally showed that today. And he's not going to get a pass because he voted guilty on Article 1 and not guilty on Article 2 today. I don't know if you just saw, but the president was just acquitted officially.
Just saw that.
Yeah, less than an hour ago. And so, most of I think everybody voted along party lines except Mitt Romney. So I don't understand why he just doesn't register Democrat or even register with the American Communist Party. I think he'd be more comfortable there.
No, I mean, getting back into the Obamacare, there were certain kind of reports that I was reading that Mitt Romney, while I was in Massachusetts, he had kind of laid down the base for what became the Obamacare. Is this something that you understand? Mitt Romney seems to be a guy that's certainly always straddling the fences, and not spend time on Mitt Romney, but he seems to be kind of straddling the fences, and I absolutely agree with you from a conservative standpoint. Not saying I'm conservative, but in that viewpoint, he doesn't seem to represent those values, even though he kind of saying that he does.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Ian. And actually, what it points to is the larger phenomenon of what I call the rhino syndrome. And we all know what rhino means. It's Republican in name only, but it's really more serious than that, because what you get with rhinos is nothing different than you get with Democrats and their policies. And I say that, if you question that, look at the fact that Obama got everything he wanted in 8 years with a Republican majority in the House and Senate. How did that happen? Because the establishment GOP, or rhinos, are really no different than the institutional left. So that's why that's happening. I think that there's been an awakening, though, in the Republican Party. I think there's a disdain for rhinos and that kind of selling the rest of us out. And I do think you're going to see some major changes, but we've got a lot to clean up, not only in the swamp, but in this November's election coming up.
Yeah, so Trump started his campaign as an independent. He didn't align himself with either party, and he gets builds a steam, and then finally he was able to reach an agreement. I don't know what the details are, but he reached an agreement, became he was represented by the Republican Party. Do you think that he would have been elected as an independent?
Well, he might have been. I think what President Trump did was he realized, as he was evolving and maturing over the years, that by the time he ran for president, he had actually leaned much more to the values of the right. And I'm talking along, not along like the rhino side of things, but much more like Goldwater and the conscience of a conservative. Those kinds of values where you're responsible for your own, caretaking and when you can and things like that. So I think he might have won as an independent. It was more about the values that he was embracing that resonated with people more than any one party. I think if the Democratic Party had been much more to the right and, embracing those kinds of values, he might have been successful there, because he's an incredible articulator. And, if you haven't already read it, I highly recommend, and I'm not pushing it for any particular reason. You can get it for $1. His book, The Art of the Deal, because it really shows you some insight into how he negotiates and how he wants it to be a win-win. I don't mean to digress in that region, but it gives you a little bit of an idea.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Of where he's coming from, and I think why he was successful, not because he went with one particular party over another.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a brilliant businessman, depending on how you look at it one way or the other. He was educated at Wharton, I believe. I'm not sure if he's graduated or not, but I know he was at Wharton at least. But there's always...
He graduated. You can fact check. He graduated.
So he's a brilliant guy. But then you also bring up communism, and I think that's not getting enough attention, Jane. That's not getting enough attention. There are deep pockets there are deep pockets that are literally trying to transform this country, in my view, and pull the rug rather out from underneath other people, and certainly the younger generation has no clue. They're completely blinded. But this is a serious threat. How do you view that, Jane?
Well, I agree with you completely. It's an incredibly serious threat. When I was growing up, we won't get into ages or numbers or years, but anyway, when I was growing up, it was like, in the 60s, And, there was a lot of disdain for people who were still recovering from World War II and the Nazis and their oppression. And they were the real fascists. And so I think people had a sensitivity to it. In the 50s, it was Joe McCarthy, although his delivery and his approach was wrong. The idea about saving the country from an infiltration of communism. And, if you read Andrew Breitbart's book, in one of his chapters, he devotes a long chapter to how communism actually got rooted in a country like ours that was founded on the very opposite of that: individual liberties, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, doing whatever you want in your career, following your dreams. But he explains how this disgruntled group of communists came over from Germany, these young men, and they formed something called the Franklin School. I highly recommend you read about the Franklin School, or your viewers, and or read that section of Breitbart's book, Righteous Indignation, because it's incredibly informative, and it shows how that got root in the U.S. in a certain segment of society that was, just unhappy themselves. But we managed to keep it at bay for the last 40-ish years, and now it's resurging because there is a whole wave of, and I don't want to blame this on a generation, but of younger people, and I say younger than myself, so people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, that are saying, gee, that might be really nice. And they kind of have this romantic view of communism. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who do understand what it is and the dangers of it, and that it's never worked on the planet. Not any form of it. It's not about the form or the approach. It's never worked before. It's incumbent upon all of us to really educate people and help others understand, without hitting them over the head, that this is a dangerous movement, and we've got to be careful in our country, because I don't understand why people want to come to the United States and change it. That just stay where you are in your communist, whatever, oppressive hellholes. Don't come here and try to revert us to what you left.
Yeah, a few weeks ago we hosted Servando Gonzalez, and he's a Cuban-born, University of Havana educated author that literally says that the United States is he says that Castro's Cuba was a testing ground for well, it was communism, but it was a testing ground for what he believes the powers that be are trying to literally transform the America into. And again, I believe that Americans have no clue how the urgency of what is happening, because this is a transformation that is happening while the mass public seem to be blinded. Jane, tell us a little bit about your book, A Sea of New Media.
Oh, you're very kind. I was going to just follow up on that. You mentioned Obama. Obama really expedited the whole communist movement, and we can talk about that another time if we don't have time tonight. But he actually expedited it, and
you can get into that. Jane, if you have some comments, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit more about that, because I think it's important for people to understand how these things happen. And I think because he was raised by his grandparents on his mom's side. They were self-avowed communists. His father, Obama Sr., was a self-avowed communist and absolutely hated the United States and everything it stood for. If you or I were raised from, toddlerhood in that vein of thinking, with activist grandparents and a mom who's off on the other side of the world with communist, activists too, you and I might have grown up with a different view of our world in the United States as well. But nevertheless, there's a lot of mystery around Obama. But if you look back at his history, and there's a lot there to dig for, you'll see that he was very much aligned with, Bill and Bernadette Dorn, and he was following Saul Alinsky's, rules for radicals. He totally opened up the White House to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a very dangerous organization in our country. We found right over here nearby in Virginia, in Annandale, Virginia, in 2004, there was a police officer who stopped a woman in Muslim garb at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. She was taking photographs of the undergirding of the bridge. And when he checked her out, he found that there was an outstanding warrant. And so when they dug a little further, they did execute the warrant at her home and found a basement under the basement. And that's where they found a document called the Explanatory Memorandum, the Muslim Brotherhood's plan for America. And we're in that phase right now. They've executed phase 2. They're no longer flying airplanes into our buildings. They're conducting what's called civilization jihad. They're rapidly getting elected to office, especially and most dangerously on the local and state levels, even more so than the federal levels. But they're infiltrating, they're creating community organizations, and it's all like fire ants. They're all getting ready to execute. And I don't know when that's going to be, but in this document, the explanatory memorandum, and it's freely available online if you Google it, you'll learn a lot about what is happening and what they're doing, and they'll explain that they're infiltrating very quietly into government and community agencies and medical, organizations and things like that, because their goal is only one goal. If you study John Guandolo's work, the threat. There's only one Islam, and the goal is to take over. They have also in part hijacked the Democrat Party because they created something called the Muslim Caucus. I don't think there's a Jewish caucus or a Catholic caucus or a Buddhist caucus. But anyway, they've also co-opted the Democrat Party because that's where they find a home. And a lot of the Democrat values like abortion and tolerance of LGBTQ is actually antithetical to their religion, but they're just holding their nose for now because that's how they can infiltrate our government. And eventually, I know I sound like a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but eventually through that explanatory memorandum, they tell us how they're going to do it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Of course, we're going into religion and getting away from communism, but so that's a different. I mean, that's a totally different threat, I suppose. Go ahead.
They can be intertwined. They're using each other. The politics of it and the religion of it. In that instance, there's a book by David Horowitz called The Unholy Alliance, and it's the marriage between the Democratic left and the Muslim Brotherhood. So we've got to be very vigilant on so many different levels, Ian.
Yeah, Jane. So let's go into gun control because last night Pelosi tears up Trump's speech. Trump refuses to shake Pelosi's hand. I mean, it's becoming uncivil. But then the Parkland, the father of the Parkland victim walks out of the State of the Union. What's going on in your view with gun control in the country, and how do you view that?
Well, I have to, full disclosure, I am a Second Amendment. I'm proud to say I love my United States Constitution. I don't pick and choose what I like or other rights that people can have. I happen to appreciate the Second Amendment right to bear arms. I'm a grandmother, but I am fully trained in firearms. I belong to a women's gun group, and we're not activists politically. In that particular group, we learn safety, we practice situations, and we practice our shooting skills at the NRA in Fairfax, Virginia. It's a beautiful range. But what's happening is it's all part of this movement, and I'll take it back to the whole issue you raised about communism re-infiltrating our country. One of the things that the Nazis did that was very effective was to, one of the first things they did was to start to chastise speech, punish and prosecute in the courts for speech that was unlikable to the government. But the other major thing they did was they disarmed their citizenry. They lured them into giving up their guns for money or exchange for food or things like that. And I can tell you that thousands of Jews would never have gotten into those cattle cars for the camps had they been armed, and they would never have left their homes and walked away and allowed their belongings and their prized possessions and their family members to be yanked off either. So, the Second Amendment, and I want to say something else about all of our amendments. These are not privileges given to us or guaranteed to us by our government. They're considered by our founding fathers as our inherent rights as human beings from God.
Right.
So the reason people need to I know you probably get it, but people need to understand these rights, whether you use them or not. It doesn't matter if you use all of them or not. They're designed to protect us from our government. And so when you have the government, I live in Virginia. I'm very close to D.C., but I live in Virginia, and it's a state it's a state of emergency from a citizen's perspective right now. Unfortunately, the Dems were able to take over every branch of government in Virginia, just like in New York, and New York is imploding. I have a family member who is on the judiciary in the state of New York, and that person is just beside themselves because the state is imploding under Democratic rule. But getting back to Virginia, as you all know, we just, we're on the verge of really literally becoming felons overnight. And what people need to understand, even if they're on the fence about Second Amendment gun rights, you have to understand that you can have as many laws as you want. Criminals don't follow laws. That's why they're criminals. And we had over 50,000 people converge on our state capitol in Richmond about a week and a half ago to show the government that they're not going to get away with this. Because Ralph Northam, the black-faced governor who believes that babies born even at term can be killed if the mother doesn't want them, is radically, eradicating our Second Amendment rights and ignored 50,000 people who, by the way, convened all day long, and there was never one issue. No one was hurt. There were no crimes committed. And you know why, Ian? Because about 50,000 people were armed, and nobody who meant trouble there was gonna take the chance.
Yeah, no, you bring up obviously an incredible point in that if you give up your rights to defend yourself, you might as well just tie your hands behind your back and let the person beat you up. I mean, in a sense,
right. Right. No, right. That's absolutely right.
And on the communism talk, listeners may not understand that Karl Marx, even though he also wrote in London, he also, I'm not sure if it was the New York Times but he did write for some period of time for a New York-based publication. So again, this is a real threat. Do you think, as a conservative, Jane, and a double PhD, incredibly intelligent woman, do you think that the media has completely has brainwashed the American public to pigeonhole, if you will, Donald Trump into being this white racist man that is out to just kind of get what I don't know if they're minorities, that kind of, because that seems to me my perception of what the media makes out for Trump. And again, I think that any president of the United States should be respected because they're in the office. But this seems to be just getting out of control. Whereas, he is blatantly disrespected, and his values and his qualities are not brought to the forefront, and he's painted as this kind of monster by many media outlets. Do you think this is a deliberate motive by media to do that?
Yeah, you are raising a really important issue, Ian. It's just it actually could be an entire show, and it's a nice segue to my book. But let me answer your question first. I think we're in serious trouble in this country because we really have, not only do we not have a free press anymore, we don't have a press at all. And I say that because not only, we've pretty much uncovered that not only do we not really have a press that digs for the truth, but we actually have a press that makes up information that is part and parcel of disinformation, and it's all connected to the left. Unfortunately, there's no portion of the media that belongs to the right. At least you could say, I know who to listen to. People used to think that they were getting that with Fox News, but I have to tell you, Fox News is not a conservative outlet. It's run by the Murdoch sons, right, and they are intentionally driving it into the left. Right. And that's why, and they're weaving it in so that people might be misled into thinking, to convert to those kinds of ideas.
It's a tabloid. It's a tabloid, in my opinion.
Definitely a tabloid, and I don't trust it. I mean, and there are a lot of people that are sellouts in Fox News. I won't go down the list of names, but I wrote an article about it, and it's on my website, drjaneruby.com, and it's an article that says basically Fox News is not conservative, and you'll see what I lay out as all the evidence. And it started when they started to oust real conservative people like Roger Ailes, who died from a heart attack under the stress, and then Bill O'Reilly, and they tried to do it to Hannity and Charles Payne, but they didn't succeed. They had strong enough followings. But what's happened is the press, the reason I wrote the book, A Sea of New Media, and I don't know if your listeners or viewers can see if there's a camera going, but I'm holding the book up. It is on Amazon. I was inspired to write this book, A Sea of New Media. The subtitle is Transformation of the American Press. And I was inspired to write it because I saw a film of Andrew Breitbart on the National Mall from 2010, where he had recently vindicated some Tea Party, like a couple thousand Tea Party members who previously had been accused by 3 African-American congressmen who claimed that when they were on the steps of the Capitol one day during a protest against a bill, everybody had cameras. Nobody could come up with proof that this had happened. So Breitbart started offering larger and larger rewards for anybody who could come up with a cell phone or any kind of audio or video of this happening. And they said it happened numerous times. So essentially he vindicated them. And at this, fast forward to this night on the National Mall in Washington, and that's the grassy knoll between the Washington Monument and the Capitol. There were thousands of people. It was a beautiful night. And he said, hold up your cell phones, hold them up. And you could see all these lights from their cell phones. And he said, there we have a sea of new media, a sea of new media to capture the lights. And if you think you can't be effective, think about the guy who captured Hillary Clinton being dragged into the van, half unconscious, right at the 2016 9/11 memorial. And the campaign lied to us and said she wasn't ill. Never would have known she wasn't ill, just had his phone. And we've all done it. We the press now. There's no other way we can get the truth out to each other if we don't participate and we're not the press.
Right. And so so what is that if you take the internet, take away the TV and then go into the internet and you create your own media in that sense of your own phone and your own witness, do you choose do you, because Facebook, regardless of the various platforms on the web, do you find Twitter to be and even there's something interesting. So I don't remember the name of the publication, but there was a financial publication, something Zero Hedge had done. Go ahead.
Oh, they were just suspended a day or two ago.
Right, they just got suspended because of questioning a researcher at Wuhan laboratories, and so they got suspended. So is there a safe platform to be using? Do you have any comments on that?
That's a great question. Great question. It's something I fantasize about, and not only that. I mean, I've been a victim of it myself. I was recently suspended in the fall. I was suspended for 4 hours for tweeting a truthful piece on Ilhan Omar. Then, she committed immigration fraud. Then I was suspended most recently for 7 full days from Twitter. So you're essentially silenced. I was blocked from the public square, so to speak. And I recently had Alan Dershowitz, who's a constitutional expert, on my show, Dr. Jane's DC, and I asked him about it, and he said, that in his opinion, places like Twitter and Facebook have become the public square, and it's a common place, so it may have to be regulated as such. But they just suspended and locked the account. I don't know if you heard this as well, of James O'Keefe from Project Veritas, simply because he asked the Washington. Jeff Bezos owns the Post. Jack Dorsey owns Twitter. These are all interlocking directorates, and they're controlling the speech. I fear, Ian, it's going to get a lot worse as we get closer to the election, because they're going to need to control the flow of information and block many of us who are trying to get the word out.
Right, and so one of the affiliate sites to discuss the truth and to iantrottier.com is something called Stop Mass Media, and Stop Mass Media has a diagram that shows viewers just how corrupt, and I'm using that word, just how corrupt American media, the American media empire, has become over the past few decades, and that from about a majority of 80 different companies controlling the main media outlets, it now stands at about 6 different major companies. And so you're talking about Jeff Bezos, and so when the middle class in that sense shrinks we are in grave danger, and I don't really, and without knowing exactly your talk with Dershowitz, but it sounds like, and not to misconstrue his comment, but it sounds like the internet already is being censored. If you're being banned and shadow banned and being blocked for a certain amount of times, that is in no way is that a free and just press in my view. And Jane, my question, I guess, is this deliberately being done to cause a divide? Whereas if someone who cites as being a Democrat may value a Republican law or policy or stand, it almost seems like today, if that person is to cross and say, oh, hey, you know what? I actually think that is a great Republican policy, even though they vote Democrat, they side themselves Democrat, or vice versa. It seems like they completely have to side themselves with their political alignment, and it's not accepted if they agree otherwise. Do you have any comments on that?
Right. Well,
yeah.
That is definitely the message to. Yes, that is definitely the left's message. And I say the left because the media is the left and the left is the media. And you hit on something really, really important. People don't understand this, but there is a smaller and smaller number of entities or people that control our information. And unfortunately, Silicon Valley that helped develop the internet and that developed a lot of our smart tools is unfortunately left-wing and progressive. Is to create a substantial, sort of counter version of that, really in large scale. That is not necessarily all on the right. I don't want to hear an echo chamber, but I certainly don't want to be blocked. People should pick and choose what they want here. And they should have a chance to think about things on both sides. But if the left offered that by virtue of controlling all of this media and information flow, I would probably tolerate it. But they don't. They do send that message that you indicated to not only their people on their side of things, but to those of us on the right that, you'll be heard when we want you to be heard. And, they're gaining more and more control because they're advancing the technology beyond just general algorithms, and they're starting to flag people. People with 1 million followers. Look they banned James Woods. They banned my best friend, by the way, he has permanent residence. She had 300,000 followers on Twitter, and she was monetizing it. That was how she was making her living, and she was banned. And there are many, many examples like her and James Woods. So it's frightening, Ian,
Jane,
to tell you the truth. I think people should be, and they should demand more. Yep.
I'm sorry. You're right. Next time you join program, we'll have we'll tie you in through the phone line because you're right. The Skype is going in and out. Who was the other person that you mentioned? You mentioned James Woods, and then you also mentioned somebody else. Would you repeat that for listeners?
Oh, sure. I'll be happy to. I was saying that people with very large followings. And the person I mentioned in addition to James Woods' district, which is the president and Mrs. Trump's new permanent residence. So she just locked in the primary. But she had 300,000 followers on Twitter and even greater numbers on Facebook, and she was banned from all social media because she was telling the truth. And she was monetized, making her living on that. So they cut people down. They very frightening. And I think your listeners, everybody must demand more from these town squares that are online.
Yeah, absolutely. Jane, wonderfully said. Some great viewpoints and commentaries. Tell us something else about what is your objective, if you haven't already conveyed it, because it sounds like you probably have. What is your objective with for the American people through your book, A Sea of New Media? And Jane, also, what I'd like you to do is define. I think there's been a good picture painted of what what the president talks about when he talks about fake news, but I'd like you to also define, in your understanding, what does he talk about when he talks about the deep state? So those two things, if you would, Jane, revisit a sea of new media, and then go into what the president talks about when he's talking about a definition of deep state.
Sure. On the count of the book, what I'm trying to do is to inform people and make them more aware of the fact that they hold a powerful tool in their hands every day. It's your cell phone. It's a camera. It's everything. It's an audio recording device. If you see something, record it. Take a picture of it. Take a video of it. You have the power to tell the truth, because we cannot trust the institutions right now that are representing press and media. So that's what the book is about. It's to tell you, that we are all the media now. Okay, so that's the book. And anyway, and in any future programs, if you take live questions, I love taking live questions. I don't care if the people are on the right or the left. I welcome all of it, as long as they're civil about it. With regard to you actually asked me a two-part question around President Trump, around fake news and also the deep state. If you want, I'll touch a little bit on both. When the president talks about fake news, it's because he will make a comment or make an announcement or give a speech, and it is not objectively reported. It is twisted, it's turned, it's completely rolled into something else, and it is formed into a narrative that serves the purpose of politicians and policymakers and other people on the left. With regard to the deep state, you're talking about a term, everybody defines it for themselves differently, but you're talking about a term that I've heard experts say encompasses parts of the FBI, parts of our intelligence community, the CIA, rogue people in the CIA, other types of political operatives. It's usually something underground that's operating for a particular agenda. It's been thrown around a lot since President Trump was elected and inaugurated, and I think that's because he's made people more aware of it, and people are getting more informed and more sophisticated in the way they're looking at things. So I think if I talk about the deep state, you could talk about the whole group on the left, like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and McCabe and Brennan and that whole cabal, and Obama's entire cabinet. Obama's still like a shadow president. I mean, he's still underground. He lives here in D.C. He lives a couple of miles away from me in a with a big cement wall that's guarded with with armed guards and electrical fence and all this other stuff for a guy who didn't like a border. But there's a lot going on underground. And these people, I want people to understand, if you don't remember anything else I said other than the title of my book tonight, that there was an attempted overthrow of the president of the United States. And if you think that sounds dramatic, really look at what they were trying to do. If they were not exposed in little bits along the way, we might have had our president removed from office simply because he was going in, for them, the wrong direction, for the country, the right direction. So this is a very serious, this is a banana republic type of thing when you talk about, a coup against the president. So God bless him. I pray for him every day. I hope he stays safe. He's doing incredible things for our country. And even if you're on the left and you're a Democrat, I think a lot of people are starting to see that now.
Yeah, well said, Jane. Very well said. Jane, we're winding down here at the top of the hour. We thank you for joining Discuss Your Truth and Windward Radio. Some final, you've said a lot, and I know you've just kind of summed up, you've given some really good thoughts for listeners out there. Some closing statements in regards to how you think America can become a better country, and how the divide can become more united, because it seems like a United States, the united part seems to be dissolving. It seems like there is a divide happening, and it only becomes stronger and stronger. How do we reverse that? How do we become a more united country?
Well, thanks for that's a great question, Ian. And before I wrap it up, I just want to thank you so much for the honor of being on your show. I really enjoyed it. I think you're super sharp, and you've got a new fan. And I'm just happy to be here. I think we've had a fun, spirited discussion. I do want to wish everyone well. With all the things we talk about, with all of the negative, things that we're trying to, uncover and make people aware of. I still want people to remember that we live in the greatest country on the planet. We are blessed to be here. I've been to all four corners of the world a number of times. I've vacationed and I've worked and I've done all kinds of things. And there's still no greater joy than to walk through U.S. Customs and be back on our soil. It is truly, there's no place like it in the world. Better. We need to just keep making it stronger. President Trump can't do this all by himself. And for those of you listening and watching, we need all of you. Don't think that you can pass this off to your neighbor. Whatever you can do. If it's to write a letter, to the White House, so I used to work in the Office of Presidential Correspondence. They keep track of the themes, the flow, what people are thinking and feeling, and they use it with good purpose. Do whatever you can do. Go to your polling places this November and be a volunteer poll watcher. Count the number of people that come in at the end of that day's election, the votes. Look at the numbers and make sure they jive, because there are a lot of shenanigans that are going to happen. So whatever you can do to do your part, we all have to come together and do our part, because we do live in the greatest country on earth, and we're so blessed. We're so very blessed to have this country. Let's keep it the way it is and just make it stronger. So thank you again, Ian.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jane Ruby. Jane, thank you for joining the program. We will be back in touch with you at a later date.
Stay well. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jane Ruby. DC Pundit. I had no idea she had a double PhD. So that was delightful to hear. And you know what? That's a pretty awesome accomplishment. Okay, I mean, one PhD or. And I understand an MD is a different doctorate. I understand depending on what type of doctor you're becoming. A surgeon can require sometimes an 8-year residency, I think, for neurosurgery. But there's different levels, if you will, of a doctorate. But a philosophical doctorate is nothing easy to accomplish. And having two. Non-honorary, as she pointed out, is a wonderful accomplishment. So a very bright woman there, and a wonderful segue as we opened up with 9-year-old Laurent Simons. Laurent Simons out of Belgium, and what a fabulous kid, young man he was. So a pleasure to have him join the program. Okay, next week, doubleheader coming your way, folks. And by the way, please, former Wall Street attorney Gerald Posner has written it's not ready. You're unable to purchase it. You can get it on pre-order. It is Simon Schuster publication. Again, he's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. Pharma is his recent book coming out in March 10th, I believe, might be the date. And it is an 800-page book that destroys the pharmaceutical industry. So look for that. It is as it sounds, Pharma. That's coming your way, and he'll be joining the program April 15th. And Freedom Reserved, No More Lies, will be released. That is my own publication. Will be released April 2020. Brought to us by trying to, and I want to mention also Andy Thomas, who's revised his book Conspiracies, the Facts, the Theories, the Evidence. He's a UK-based researcher. He has joined the program before, and he'll be rejoining us in May. Truth or Fiction? Read the facts about the world's biggest conspiracy theories and decide for yourself. Right? Decide for yourself, even if you think you may be shadow banned by Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be. The fact of the matter is, you need to, if you, just like Dr. Ruby said, if you think there's an issue, raise your voice, talk about it, write about it, come out about it. That's the most important thing that you can do. I'm going to quote former guest on the program. We haven't been in touch with him for quite a while, but very high-ranking CIA operative, and I got to wrap up here, but Ray McGovern, CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and to piggyback off of what Dr. Rubio had just said, is that there are elements of this country, yes, FBI, CIA, that are highly infiltrated, that are completely corrupt, and there are ties between the CIA and the Council on Foreign Relations. And that's something that Servando Gonzalez, if you catch that episode, went into in great detail. And that the Council on Foreign Relations, is there? That's a Rockefeller run organization. Okay, the Rockefellers donated the land. The United Nations stand on. How much of the Rockefellers, and don't forget that JD said that competition is a sin. Competition's a sin. That's like anti-American, right, dude? Yeah, that's like anti-American. But that is his philosophical base and how he controlled the oil industry and built himself in a monopoly. And I think he'd be worth something like $400 billion today. But it goes much deeper than the Rockefellers, and that's what I try to get at. You need to definitely dig deeper. What is the City of London? If you're in the UK and you're listening to this, how do you feel about the City of London? You're patriotic to your Queen, and Queen Elizabeth, a wonderful lady, does great things, but she's controlled by the Bank of England. That's my understanding. She's got to meet the Crown Mayor in the City of London, and it's a separate neighborhood, it's a separate jurisdiction. This goes back to William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror gave this plot of land its own sovereignty. So that means it's not part of England, just like the Vatican's not part of Italy. It's like its own district or its own country. It's a sovereign entity. It's a corporation. It's a corporation, okay? And that is something you can find at IanTrottier.com articles. Okay, so Ray McGovern quote, Ian, we no longer have any real sense of free media. Let that sink in. This guy would hand-deliver briefings to George Bush. And again, I don't take sides politically, okay? I don't take sides politically. I have my own opinions on various policies, but I try not to take sides politically. I don't take sides politically. I don't take sides religiously. I just like to get down at the dirt and the fact. Okay, what kind of soil is the root planted in? All right. The only hope, I'm continuing his quote, the only hope now is people like you. This is what Ray McGovern said to me on this program. We can repair the damage and get people listening to people who know what they are talking about. Okay, so I'll read that one more time, and I have a final thought to close out the program. Ian, we no longer have any real sense of free media. The only hope now is people like you who can repair the damage and get people listening to people who know what they are talking about. And that is people like you listening. Because before the Zika virus hit Miami in 2016, I had absolutely no desire to do what I'm doing right now. Okay? None. Never did I see that I'd be doing what I'm doing right now. Okay? Pharma, 800-page total bomb, hopefully, on the pharmaceutical industry. And not the pharmaceutical industry. I have nothing against saving lives, and I have nothing against medicine. I mean, I get a headache, I need an Advil. Okay? I've got nothing against medicine. I have everything against corruption and greed and manipulation. Next week, Kevin Annett, Canadian-based researcher and author, he's going to get into, I'll bring this up here for you. Kevin Annett he's a renowned global human rights campaigner. He's a whistleblower. He's led the movement to expose and prosecute child murder. Yes, this is deep. Child murder by church and state in Canada and Europe. Kevin is the co-founder for the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State. Remember, we have a separation of church and state in the United States. Yeah, very important, right? Religiously. Okay? Don't use that for any ill motives, please. He has been twice nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, according to his website. And we're going to follow that up with a doubleheader at the 6 o'clock hour. 6:15, we're going to bring on author Russ Baker. He's a publisher, investigative journalist, controversial, credible, courageous. Baker's the editor-in-chief and founder of nonprofit news organization WhoWhatWhy.com. He's a native of Venice, California. Russ is a BA in political science from UCLA and an MA from Columbia School of Journalism. He's a former contributing editor of the Columbia Journalism Review in his 25-plus career. Baker has written for a variety of publications. That includes the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, Washington Post, Esquire, Vanity Fair, and the Village Voice. So highly accomplished. He seemed unimpressed with conventional wisdom and quickly spotted and dismissed spin. And that's what Dr. Judy was just talking about. Dr. Ruby was just talking about in regards to fake news. Okay? He dismissed spin and wasn't intimidated by the powers that be. So what are the powers that be? That's a quote by Bill Moyers on Russ Baker. Baker's author of 2008 books Family Secrets, which raises uncomfortable questions about members of the Bush family and their careers and relationships outside of politics, and presents evidence of connections between George H.W. Bush and individuals involved with the Watergate scandal and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And if you get into what Baker's gotten into, that'll be coming your way next week. Baker makes a tie in the Nixon campaign. And he says that through his research, I believe it's Prescott Bush. Remember, Prescott's the one that funding both sides of the war in World War II. This is fact. Yes, he was tried as an enemy of the state, Prescott. Yes, the same father whose two offspring have occupied the Oval Office. That means W and HW, they're both Bushes. Okay, are children of Prescott. And Prescott, through Baker's research, put Nixon into office. We can go into that next week. This has been your Wednesday edition of Discussions of Truth, 5 o'clock p.m. Windward Radio. We're transitioning to a podcast format. I'm already in a podcast format, Anchor.fm, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio. You can find all of my past broadcasts on those platforms. And until next week, folks, be awesome.